we're going to start today's proceedings by welcoming Margaret Atwood. I can't even, I mean, it's no point even reading your bio because people know you so well, but may not know so much about what we're going to talk about tonight, which is good. I must say also that tonight is sponsored by Leica Sport Optics, so thank you very much for that. And just to let you know, the format is that we talk for an hour and then afterwards a Q&A. So it's all going to be fun tonight. So Margaret, how are you and where are you?
I am okay. I got my first vaccine shot on Tuesday because of being old.
You're not, well,
Love that merry laughter of yours. Yeah, because of being old, David. And I had a slight reaction on the next day, but I'm fine now. And it's Toronto, which is in Canada, and it is not yet spring migration here. We have a few little inklings, but not the migration which we get in April and May.
okay. For those who may not know, Margaret is actually a keen birder and I met you very cheekily about, I don't know, it must be about at least 5 or 6 years ago. And it was at a dinner for the BirdLife International. They got this kind of club called the Bird Club or something. I can't remember what it's called actually, but it's for
Yeah, the Rare Bird Club.
a Rare Bird Club. That's it. And you were with your literary agent, who's here tonight, Vivian. And I cheekily just walked up to because I was watching you speak because you were the chairman or the president.
The money extractor, David.
And I cheekily went up to you because I loved, I thought you were really, it's the first time I ever saw you, in action. And I thought, wow, this woman's got, she's got wit and I must talk to her. So I went up and spoke to you and your literary agent. And then I suppose the rest is kind of history. You didn't back me away at all. You even posed with me for a selfie, which was great. And your literary agent, who looked after greats like yourself and Julie Cooper, became my literary agent. So I was like,
Woo! You took her on a trip. You took her on a birding trip, did you not?
that's right. She eventually came on a trip with me to Serbia to see the owls. And I'm still waiting for you, by the way, Margaret, to come along on a trip one day with me. So I'm waiting for that. But I know that you've invited me to your neck of the woods on several occasions. So my bad for not actually turning up yet.
You'll,
So
yes, for sure. That will happen.
that's great. Now, we are going through a bit of a rough time in the world at the moment. How have you been spending your sort of pandemic, if that's the
Yeah.
right phrase to use?
Yeah, so what do writers do anyway? They sit in a room and talk to themselves and go for walks. So, nothing different there. But, and then of course I got asked to write a lot of pieces about what I was doing during the pandemic, which wasn't all that exciting, except the time I climbed out on the roof because of the squirrels. And my family got somewhat perturbed about that. But it was a flat roof, I wasn't going to fall off. So we dealt with that, and now, right now, and you know about this, we're planning our second online Spring Song and Pelee Island Bird Observatory fundraiser. So we usually do this in person, but we threw it together last year, and because we had to, and we're doing it again this year. So like you, I've been doing a lot of online stuff, and when we all started out, there were quite a few glitches and comic moments. I didn't appear online without my pants on, as some people have done, but nor was I getting photobombed by a baby. But there have been interesting moments of suddenly disappearing, and everybody trying to figure out why that had happened. But we seem to have more of a handle on it now, and I'm sure some of this online stuff will continue even when we're back to in person because it allows a lot more people to join and be present, does it not? So you can even take people on sort of virtual bird events. You can show them on a camera, on a screen, what you're seeing. And I think that's probably been very appreciated during this time when so many more people have turned to natural surroundings because you can be outside without getting sick.
Well, exactly, and you know this time has been very, very, very strange. But as you say, I think it's going to be with us for some time. Do you think that the world's going to change after this? Do you think that once we come back to some kind of semi-normality, that we will kind of reflect on this and be better people, or do you think we're just going to go back to what we were doing before all this started?
A mix. But one thing is certain, we have to put more into rewilding and conservation. We have to do that if we wish to remain a mid-sized oxygen-breathing species on this planet. Because if you imagine an Earth and things alive to us, we would not be alive either. It is the natural world that supplies our oxygen. We would not have an oxygen atmosphere. It would still be a methane atmosphere if plant life had not started up with the photosynthesis and splitting H2O into H and O 1.9 billion years ago. So kill the oceans and that's it for us. And we have to give that some not just serious thought, but serious action. Or we are going to be, first of all, we'll have trouble breathing and get very stupid. We'll have a lot of car accidents. And then that'll kind of be it.
Interesting. Now, a lot of people don't actually know that you.
Say, terrifying.
Well, yes, that too. But I didn't want to. I didn't want to get too dramatic so early. Actually, a lot of people don't know that you have this massive interest in birds and wildlife and the environment. And I know, obviously, your late husband Graham was a massive bird. I had the pleasure of meeting him a couple of times as well. But what I never knew was that your parents were kind of in the sciences. You know, your father was an entomologist, and your mother a dietitian and nutritionist. And I remember when I spoke to you before this particular evening, I actually said I didn't realize that they had dietitians and nutritionists back in the 30s. I thought that that was a modern thing.
No, I think their idea of what is good nutrition has changed since that time, but they were certainly into it then. And these people typically got jobs in hospitals and other similar institutions planning the meals. So that was the sort of job I would have. But my dad was a field biologist, and that's why we spent so much time up in the north towards Canada. So we would go up quite early in the spring when the insects were waking up and study them all summer. And then when they became dormant in the winter, we would go back to a city and he would write up the results. So I think one of the things for both of them was my mother was an outdoors tomboy and my dad liked to spend a lot of time in the woods. So if they wanted to get married, they would have to find another person who was into doing that, which they did. So not very many women of that time would have thought it was a good idea to go up into the woods with no electricity, no running water, no washing machine, and a wood cook stove with two small children. But that suited my mom just fine.
Why didn't you not get into insects then? Were you actually interested in insects or?
My my interest as a nascent biologist was actually in botany. Why was that? Plants don't move around a lot. It's easier to see them. And I was a nearsighted child. So although I had a close-up view of the ants, I could see the ants really well. I had to work at seeing things that were quite far off and moving around. But one of the best bird birders that I ever knew had started life as a professional tennis player. And you know, if you're a professional tennis player, you develop the ability to see that ball moving towards you, almost like a stop motion. And he could stop motion birds. He was just like that. Because to other people it would be a blur, but he could actually see the bird in the air in a remarkable way. So there's a hint. If you want to be good at birding, become a tennis player.
Well, I've got a lot of questions I want to ask you about, when you were younger, but you have a presentation, and I think maybe it's better for you kind of talk us through that first, because I'm really fascinated by, that development from a young girl sort of running around the forest to a slightly older girl now doing what you're doing. So I'm going to be actually in charge of doing this whole screen thing, so I'm going to put it up now. Can everyone see my screen? By the way, for all you Zoomers watching, if you want to actually see this properly in its best sort of way, then please go to speaker view and not gallery view, then you'll see the whole screen. So over to you, Margaret.
Yeah, so that little red dot is pinpointing Lake Erie, which is the second one of the Great Lakes. And there's an island in the middle of Lake Erie, which is the southernmost point of Canada, and it's called Pelee Island. And that's where we have the Pelee Island Bird Observatory, where David is going to appear virtually for gala. Thank you very much, David. So put the little arrow on the island. There it is, right there. The dot is Point Pelee. You'll see a string of islands going across the lake, and that used to be a land bridge. And the spring migration takes that pathway across the lake. Birds land on Pelee Island, they eat their way from the south to the north, and they wait for a favorable wind, and then they make the big flight across the lake and land on the Canadian shore, many of them on Point Pelee, which is well known as a top birding spot in North America. And it's the same birds on Pelee Island. So we have a migration monitoring station there, which is part of the big migration monitoring network. And everybody feeds their data into it, and then you get some sort of idea of which birds are in trouble, which are increasing, which are decreasing, and information like that. So that little island, David, is where you will be virtually appearing on May 8th.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to it.
And we hope that you will be there physically when it's possible for you to do that. And that event is always on the second weekend of May, which pretty much coincides with Top Bird Days.
Cool.
So now I'm taking you to the North Woods of Canada, so northern Quebec on the western edge of it. And that is my dad, who was a field biologist. He was a forest entomologist. I think he became one of those because he was a woods guy anyway, and was looking for a job that would allow him to spend a lot of the time outdoors and away from cities. So what he's doing right there is making kindling for a fire. That's me watching him. This is in the days when we actually made, if you do this now, you would use a little device. But we used to make fires outdoors, and therefore one of the first things we learned as children was how to put out fires. Because one of the big fears in that part of the country is forest fires. You really don't want to be in a forest fire at all. So this is a bit of a staged pose. That's we had no electricity, no running water, and we had a wood stove, and that meant a lot of sawing, splitting, chopping, and carrying the wood into the wood box, where it would be used for cooking and heating. Why don't we have any shoes? We just kind of never had shoes because we would outgrow them and there weren't any shops. So that's the explanation for not having shoes. So this is my string of Vise, which I caught. And they're on a stringer, which is a piece of sapling or bush in a V shape, and you put that through the gills. So the reason I'm making that face is not that I'm feeling sorry for the fish. I didn't like their smell, fishy smell. So my mom and dad had a deal. My mom said, "I'll catch them, I'll cook them, but I'm not going to clean them." So my dad always cleaned the fish. This is a mode of transport. This is a couple of our canoes. And during the war, of course, in the 40s, gasoline was rationed. So we did have a tiny little motor that went on a motorboat, but mostly if you wanted to get around in the immediate area, you would use a canoe or a rowboat. So I was an early canoer, and I continue to canoe. There's my dad making a joke. The joke is he had a lot of axes and did a lot of things with them, including building log cabins. But the joke is his axe is sharp enough to shave with, and his bristles are tough enough so that you have to use an axe. That's the joke. In somewhat later years, he's gotten a bit older than when you first saw him. And this is myself with Graham. We're in the Arctic, and we started going there together in the year, I think, 2001. I had been myself before, but on the western part of it and on Baffin Island. But this is looks like Canadian Arctic, very close to Greenland. You can go across to Greenland. And, the birds up there, and we have taken some bird life people birding. They're pretty special, as you know. And you've gone. Come to Greenland.
Yeah, I'd love to go actually.
Well, we must arrange that. Okay. That's Graham was a very keen birder. He was a convert. So I grew up with it, la-di-da. You get sort of sloppy if you grow up with it. But he was a convert, so he was very keen. And he did a lot of work for BirdLife, and he also wrote the Bedside Book of Birds, which he, can you see that? Which he compiled over 10 years of collecting things about birds wherever we happen to be. So museums, art galleries, outdoors, in books, talking to people, every possible slant. So going as far back in history as he could go, and as far around the world as he could go, every culture and every take. So not all stories about birds have them as good. You know, some stories about birds are quite scary. The birds, Alfred Hitchcock. Unfortunately, you can see the pieces of string tying them to the roof, but never mind. Yeah, so that's something that we really enjoyed doing. We were actually staff on those trips with Adventure Canada for years. That meant that we had to take St. John's Ambulance life-saving course. So if you're ever in trouble with a red plastic torso with a tip-back head, call on me. I know how to give those things back to them. Those are not actual people, and I'll be fine. There's Graham, bird watching on TV with our spring group of people, and that is part of the island called the Spit. You can see it's a great big sandbar sticking out into the lake, and therefore a favorite place to find gulls of various kinds. And behind us in the bush, if you went back there, that you would find a lot of migrating spring warblers coming through, and other things such as woodpeckers of various kinds, and really quite a mix comes through at that time. I was doing a little happy dance. Here's the kickoff moment for the green bird race on Peely Island, which is part of Spring Song, and it goes for 24 hours. Kick off at noon, and you go for 24 hours with a team, and everybody on your team, typically there are 3 to 4 people, has to see or hear the bird before it can be counted. You come back at 12 noon the next day and enter your totals. And we have 2 prizes. One is for the green bird race, which you don't use motorized vehicles, and the other is conventional. And the winner of the green bird race gets some Peely Island wine and the Botham Cup for a year, and the conventional bird race gets a rubber chicken, very coveted, and is then entitled to join the Rubber Chicken Choir, which performs every year at the dinner following the bird race. We have one number. I am the conductor of it. Our one number is called Old MacDonald Has a Farm.
Did you actually bird race much yourself in terms of, are you an avid bird racer?
I'm not an avid bird racer because on these occasions we would have a lot of people staying in our house. So I would be managing the flow of people in and out to get their breakfast and get set up for the day's events, and then make sure that they had something to eat when they got back, etc., etc. So I was more or less minding the bird feeder on the lawn. I was watching whatever would come to that, but I would not be a bird racer. I think that's for younger people. Though we've had some pretty, advanced age, and that's Mary Lee Stevenson, a very avid bird watcher, and she's online right now. Hi, Mary Lee. And because I mentioned that we probably wouldn't be talking about slugs, she sent me a very nice picture of some slugs just to round out our experience of nature. Thank you for the slugs, Mary Lee.
So what is the story behind the slugs?
Well, I put on Twitter that we were going to be talking about birds, but probably not slugs. She felt that maybe we could talk about slugs as well. Birds don't eat slugs a lot. Toads eat slugs. I don't think birds eat them much. What do you think, David?
Well, slugs I find quite interesting to look at, but that's about it. So I think you're right. I think yeah, I think most things just look at them.
I think we also do. Yes. All right. And this is about an hour and a half north of Toronto, and the birds that you would find under those conditions would probably be ravens, blue jays, chickadees, nuthatches, filmy out winter bird watchers, maybe a couple of other species. So some things hang around all winter. And there I am out in the kinds of woods they hang around in.
Right. So, whoops. When you like now, for example, or even before, when you're writing, do you then if you're writing at home, do you then break it up by popping out and doing a bit of birding? Is that something you do as a little sort of light relief?
Yeah. If you don't break it up, you'll go crazy. So absolutely light relief. And in the city, which is also not a bad bird watching place. Toronto is not bad. Um, you could go for walks and go to parks and go to ravines because although Toronto's pretty flat, the vertical dimension is supplied by these ravines, so you can go down into them. Nobody builds on them because they flood, and that's where you're probably going to find the birds. There's also a man-made thing that goes out into Lake Ontario called the Leslie Street Spit. It's made entirely of demolished buildings, but nature has come in and populated it. And so it's got beavers, it's got coyotes, and it's got a big colony of black-crowned martins. It's got a lot of ducks because they've made little ponds. So that's another good bird place in Toronto.
It sounds like Toronto has a really amazing urban birding, urban wildlife spot. To my shame, I've only ever stepped foot in Canada once for 25 minutes, and it was on the it was on the tarmac of Nova Scotia.
Oh, where were you going?
Well, I think I was going to New York actually. I think the plane stopped at in Nova Scotia for some reason. I
Well,
was
that's weird. So that would be Halifax Airport, and you wouldn't have seen Halifax because it's surrounded by spruce. Was it foggy?
It was dark. I remember that. I was a kid. I was about 13. It's my first time on the plane as well, so I was really, more excited about that than anything else. But that was the only time I've ever stepped foot in Canada.
Yes. Well, you must step more feet in it. Not when it's dark. It's dark here. So this is up in northern Quebec again. You can see the typical rather gentle hilly shoreline, which is a post-glacier scrape landscape that is mostly rock and sand. Although you do get in old river bottoms, you'll get some clay. So that's what you're looking at there, and that's a picture that Graham took from the shore where we stay.
I've always, when I think of Canada, and I think I spoke about this with you when we had our preliminary chat, but I look at those forests and I think to myself, I get sucked into all the legends and the superstitions. I think of Wendigo, is it Wendigo? And there's Sasquatch and Bigfoot and all those things. And I feel a bit nervous if I was to be walking around in those woods in the middle of the night or even
Well,
during the day.
you shouldn't walk around in the woods in the middle of the night if you don't know where you're going. It's pretty tangled in those woods, but I don't think you would be, leapt upon by a Sasquatch. I think you might just get lost or fall down.
Are you? Do you actually believe in the existence of? Is it Sasquatch up there? I know Bigfoot's in California. Are
That's
you? Are you? Do you believe in that?
that's a West Coast thing. So not Canada's really big. In fact, you can find a song online by the Arrogant Worms called "Canada's Really Big," and that is what it points out about Canada. It's just really big. So forests are part of it, but then you get north of the forests and you get tundra, and then you get even further north than that, and you get these amazing landscapes in which you would think nothing is growing. If you look very carefully, you will find little things growing, but um, pretty barren and icy. So it is really big, and I think North America had originally just a fantastic number of different cultures and different languages, and it still does have different cultures and different languages. So the Sasquatch is a West Coast creature, and the Wendigo was more north of Great Lakes, like that.
I first heard of the Wendigo, by the way, when I was a kid reading Marvel comics. There was a character called Wendigo, and even though he was scary, I kind of liked him. He's a big guy, a big thing with big hands. It's like, a massive thing. but he was haunted. He was in trouble. He was troubled, and he would, he'd cause havoc and stuff, but he didn't mean to do it. And I really kind of felt for him. I thought, you know what? If I met you, I might actually try and shake your hand.
But did he eat people?
I think he did, yeah.
Oh, maybe you should back off on the hand shaking. Just a hint. Yeah, well, there's another Canadian character in comics called Wolverine. Remember him?
Ah, yes.
Claws that pop out. Another troubled individual. These superheroes all seem to have some angst of various kinds. I mean, what would a superhero be without the one that seemed singularly lacking was Superman, which is probably why I never found him that interesting. I much preferred Batman, but why are we talking about
You just go back to your childhood again. You spent a lot of time in the forest, as you said. But what I was surprised by is that you didn't attend school full time until you were 12. That's kind of, you're nearly done then.
Oh, well, not quite. Yeah. Yes, well, of course, if you're up in the woods without any, name all the things without, and those things would include no towns, no villages, no schools, no libraries, no movie theaters, but books. So books, very portable. Radio, not so much in those days. It would work now, you could get it, but in those days it was shortwave, and it was mostly Russia. We could get Russia. But we were speaking Russian, not much like that. Yeah, so it was like that, and what my mother would do is, in those days, school got these workbooks, and you were supposed to fill them out. So she'd get the workbooks, and we would fill them out, and it made me very superficial and speedy, because the faster you could get that workbook filled out, the sooner you could go outside.
So, do you think that if you weren't a writer, would you have been some kind of scientist? Would you followed maybe your
Very
father's footsteps?
would have been a biologist, and most of my friends would have been a botanist. And oddly enough, my marks in botany and zoology were higher than those in English, because in English they took marks off for spelling mistakes. And like a lot of writers, I spell by ear, but that you didn't get marks off for. In fact, I made fewer spelling mistakes in the sciences because those words are really weird, and they're somehow therefore easier to remember. So scrofulariaceae is easier to spell than weird.
Mm.
Weird, you're always going, is it W-I? Is it W-E?
Yeah,
Wired? Is it?
yeah, I get that. Um, in conservation, we've had a whole range of different people. Writers, we've had conservationists, we've had TV presenters, we've had all sorts of people, and I'm really curious to find out what individual people think of the world. You see so much on TV and the media about whoa, we're heading into the sixth extinction and there's wars everywhere and people aren't very nice. What's your opinion on the world? What's your experience of the world? Would you echo that, or do you think that we are nicer than what we're made out to be?
I think we're nicer than what we're made out to be if we have a chance to be nice. So being nice is in a sense a luxury. And when the food supply gets small, we get less nice because we get more desperate. So I think the more desperate people become, the less nice they are likely to be. I was always struck by the beginning of 1984, Orwell, in which he's describing his conditions as a child, and there's this chocolate bar and he wants it, and he just takes the whole thing and doesn't share. So scarcity creates competition, and the way we have arranged the distribution of wealth right now is way too top heavy, and way, how can I say this? Not enough of it is going to what we really need to, going to where we really need to put it, and we really need to put it into the natural world, and we really need to put it into people who are at the bottom of that pyramid, and we really need to put it to help indigenous people living on the land manage their space, because they're the people, as in bird life, it's the people on the ground who can tell you what's happening. But unless you make it, unless there's something in it for them, you can't just take information from people and not give back. So there are some very good models of how that would work if you empower the people who are actually living in their space and give them the tools and listen to what they're saying. That is a ground up approach to conservation. It's different from coming in and telling people that you have all the answers and that they've got to do what you say.
But why do you think the powers that be do not take conservation seriously? Why is it all about today? Why is it all about money?
It's not. They're taking it a lot more seriously than they used to, believe me. So my parents were early Sierra Club and they were early Ontario naturalists, and back in those days, in the 40s and 50s, people in those sorts of groups were just considered eccentric and not part of the real world. Well, it's actually money that isn't part of the real world. It's a completely made-up human thing. We made it up. But like a lot of things that we make up, it has power because we give it power. But when push comes to shove, take the legend of King Midas. He wanted the gift of having everything that he touched turn to gold, and then he starved to death because it did turn to gold, including his food, and then he couldn't eat anything. So at the moment at which you cannot exchange money for the things you really need, namely food, water, the elements, and so forth, it becomes useless. And if we keep gobbling up the natural world in this way, there won't be anything you can buy with this money that's accumulating in great virtual heaps somewhere. There won't be anything that you can buy with it that you need to keep yourself alive. So how did we get off on that? You're asking why they aren't paying attention. They're paying more attention now because they're beginning to realize that, but also because young people, the Greta Thunberg generation, are interested in these subjects, and they don't want to live in a world which is running out of fresh water, oxygen, and food. It would not be a pleasant world. So those people will soon be voting, and politicians who've got any smarts know that. And I think the other thing that's happening is we've seen some of the mega effects of the climate crisis happening before our very eyes. So we saw the huge fires in California. We are measuring the amount of methane that's being released from thawing tundra. We know about the huge decline in the fish populations of the planet. So you can't just keep taking from nature, taking. It runs out. And for centuries, we had this idea that it would not run out, that there would just always be more. And that's not true.
Are you heartened by the youth of today? Do you think there's going to be some really amazing conservationists coming through for the future?
Well, I know there are. I know there are because I've met some of them. And it's no longer considered this really weird, nerdy, niche thing to be doing. So the kinds of projects they're working on are pretty crucial. I know, for instance, a young marine biologist is working on fish piracy, pirating of fish. So you hadn't heard of that, had you? Yo ho ho and a bottle of fish. Yes, because these things are now rarity increases value, and it's also true that if something has value, somebody's going to fake it. So I just reposted a story today about fish fraud. People selling fish as one kind that's more expensive when it's really another kind that they've sort of doctored up. And this is apparently a huge global undertaking.
I
So
never knew about that.
we need these experts, we need these people who can tell one fish from another. And can tell us where they've come from and let us know what's going on.
Okay, you've obviously travelled around. How well do you know Europe? Are you familiar, for example, with Britain in a big way, or?
I wouldn't claim that. I've certainly traveled around in it. Um, I've never been to the Chernobyl forests. Are you going to take a trip there?
I'd love to.
Yeah, well, count me in. I'm too old to really get irradiated in a definitive way. But Spain is apparently amazing as a bird place. We did take a trip to Morocco a couple of years ago, and I think probably some of the same birds worked their way across. Uh,
Yeah,
so
I know the guy that took you there, actually, on that trip.
he was right. Yeah. So the thing we noticed when we were in France is that it was harder to bird watch because the birds are very spooky. I mean, they're spooked. They will peek out at you and then they'll get behind a tree because, of course, for centuries people have been eating them, shooting them and eating them. So that's another factor in a landscape like that where there have been people for how many? 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, 10,000, 13,000 years. The wildlife is more nervous.
That's that's a really interesting point, actually, because of all the times I've been to, well, I can't say Canada, but certainly the US, I've noticed that when I go out with birders, they're talking at the top of their voices, and I'm thinking, shh, shh, you're going to scare the birds away, but then the birds aren't scared away. And I remember birding in Los Angeles on the beach, Venice Beach, or just down the road from Venice Beach, and walking right up to terns and gulls and shorebirds that in Europe and certainly Britain, but also in Spain, you can't get within half a mile of. And
No,
I kind of thought maybe it is because they're not so used to people, or, in their long-term sort of instinctive memory compared to the old world where it's been sort of, I suppose habitated by people for such a long time. So
long time.
that's a good point.
Yeah, it's not true of all of them. For instance, we lived at one point in Lightning, which has now become quite a lot posher than it was then. But that coast along there is a prime birder. Those mud flats is a prime birding spot, and they have built hides. So as long as you're inside the hide, the birds don't see you. You can watch them quite well that way. But they are, I think, possibly fewer, less true of shorebirds, but really quite true of smaller birds that might end up in a suit.
Exactly. What advice would you give to beginners wanting to get involved? Because, obviously during this pandemic, people have suddenly realised there's nature. They've suddenly realised even in the middle of cities, which is great because that's, that wildlife is to be found there. What advice would you give people, wanting to explore this newfound world?
Don't be discouraged. Well, sometimes a new birder will go out with experienced birders, and they get quite discouraged because the experienced birders are saying, "See, right there." Oh yeah, got it. And the new one is thinking, "What just happened?" What, well, that tree there. That's not helpful to say that tree there. uh, you have to be quite specific about which tree and how to um, and how to pinpoint what you're looking at. So I'm quite good at that, at telling people exactly where to look. And when we were in Morocco, I'm sorry to say that when we were in the more deserty parts of it, we were spotting birds in relation to colored plastic bags that were blowing around. So the blue one, and then to the left, yeah, very handy. Because of course the desert birds are desert colored. It's quite hard to see them against the background. So I would say the first thing is don't be discouraged. And second, if you can find somebody who has that ability to direct your gaze exactly where it should be going, then things will be smoother. And if you're with a group of mixed, more experienced, less experienced, if you've got a good, and it's always great to have a local person because they will know those birds. They will know the birds, they will know where to find the birds, and they will know how to point the birds out. So the best thing is the one who will not leave that spot until everyone has seen that bird. And then people think, yes, I can, rather than, oh, I'll never be able to do this.
What kind of bird are you? Do you like keeping lists? Do you write? Do you actually keep? Well, I suppose it's a list. Do
We kept
you?
trip lists. We kept trip lists. We always did that. But we never kept life lists. I can see the appeal of it, but I think we were less interested in checking things off. You know, saw that, saw that, saw that, than watching them in their habitat and watching what they did. So more interested in behavior and um, what is this bird eating, how is it behaving, um, those sorts of patterns. And you know, for instance, if you're in the northwoods of Quebec in late May and there's a lot of birdsong and it suddenly goes silent, you know to look up. There's going to be a hawk.
Exactly. Um, so aside from Chernobyl,
Hmm.
which you're going to come with me on, I'm going to organise that. Um, where in the world would you like to actually, what's have you a bucket list of any sort? Would you want to visit anywhere in this world?
Well, I have my sights set on a very good nature conservancy in Africa, which is called the National Maasai Conservancy, and they are doing that thing that I just mentioned, that is round up people who live there. And what they decided to do, which was pretty radical at that time, was they took down all the fences. Took down the fences. That meant that wildlife voted with its feet. And they've seen a huge uptick in the births in their conservancy of the giraffes, the lions, and all of the associated wildlife. And they've also seen a return of bird life. The other thing they did was they cleaned up the river into which a lot of plastic had gone. I mean, plastic is a huge problem, we know that. We really need to tackle that. It's not just a huge problem in the oceans, it's a huge problem in any freshwater um, body. So they cleaned up the plastic and they're restoring native vegetation along the shores of the river, which will, of course, help hold the banks in place. And they've seen a big return of bird life. And New Zealand is the country that pioneered this kind of restoration, first on offshore islands where they had a big rat problem. Rats are a problem, you know this. So they first um, did an island quite close to Wellington, and they sussed out the rat population because there's nothing on that island but rats and grass. The rats just ate everything, including other rats. So they sussed out the rats, and then they eliminated them all at once, which you have to do with rats because they're smart. and then they replanted native vegetation, and now they have this amazing ecosystem. Birds, of course, could fly over, which they did. And now New Zealand has a goal, which is the elimination of invasive bird-destroying species by, I think it's 2030. They've set a very ambitious goal, and they got a lot of buy-in from people because people see the benefit. They get it that this is a good thing, but they have an uphill battle because it's not just the rats, and it's also the Australian possums that somebody had the smart idea of bringing over. The flowers of the flowering trees that the native birds would otherwise be feeding from. Anyway, I think what you learn as a biologist of any kind is the interconnectedness of things. You know, things are just so closely interconnected, and you can make a change that you think is beneficial, but you haven't figured out what the side effects of that are going to be. That's the story of the cane toads they brought over to Australia. They thought we were going to eat this pest, which they did, but they ate everything else as well.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's so, for me, so disheartening and depressing when these people, for whatever reasons, introduce things to alien parts of the world. I mean, it's happened all over the world. I mean, in North America, you know, starlings and house sparrows are two things I can think of immediately. But then there's been other introductions of but species like even, you know, tree sparrows, Eurasian tree sparrows and skylarks. And same thing in New Zealand. They've introduced things like rooks, which are found in Europe and Britain, and song thrushes and things like that. And it's such a detrimental thing to do, and I just don't understand, you know, why people do that. It's just really annoying.
well, originally they did it because they didn't realize what the effects were going to be. And of course, a lot of the introductions are unintentional. Some they're insects. They get hides and pieces of wood, and then they just go wild because they don't have any natural predators in the new place. So we've had emerald ash borers just, you know, going through all the ash trees, gone like that. So yeah, it is a big problem, and it's the same problem as the spread of human-killing viruses.
Yeah, true.
Things hit rights, and it is a big problem. So we have a number of invasive plant species, and eliminating them is good for native bird life because then the native species grow back. But it's a big, it's an uphill climb for sure.
Yes. Is there an animal on this planet that you would love to see that you haven't seen yet?
Oh boy, well, almost all of them. Yes, I've never seen a lion in its native habitat.
Sorry, you never seen a what?
Lion, I've never seen a lion.
Nor have I. There's two of us.
Two of us. Well, there you go. We've got to go see the lion, David. Um, yeah, I think a lot. Um, yeah, when you count the number of animals you have seen and then realize how many more there are, you realize that you're seriously lacking in the animal seeing department.
Yes, totally. What is your favourite bird?
I would never ever answer that. Anyone's going to hear about it, you know. They talk amongst themselves. The smartest is probably the raven. Very smart bird. One of the most peculiar is the loon, which still has teeth and makes a weird cry. Actually, it makes three weird cries. All of its cries are weird. So those are two North American ones for you, but the raven, of course, is around the world. Originated in Australia, believe it or not. Yes, now has many, many relatives. So they are, uh, some of my favorites. I'm very fond of owls, though they are not the brightest. They're certainly very, very photogenic and cute.
Okay, and if you could be anywhere in the world, notwithstanding this current blight that we're suffering, where would you like to be?
For what purpose?
For the purpose of enjoying life.
Well, for the purpose of enjoying life. Well, I think you can enjoy life just about wherever you are. And I think that's one of the things that we have learned from our pandemic experience, that it does not have to be some super star-studded and something or other, that just going deeper into where you are can be very revealing. So one of the things my dad used to do with people was take them out just into one of the local ravines and measure out a square foot and see what could be found in that square foot. You'd be amazed.
So a bit of a bio blitz.
Yeah, like that. When you know about Christmas bird counts, so it's the same idea. What can you find in your area? And how we're doing the bird race this year, because we can't all gather on Peely Island. We will have the bird race, but wherever people happen to be. So they'll start at 12 noon, wherever they happen to be, do the speaking and counting for 24 hours, and then post their totals and their species. And that could be just wherever you are.
Absolutely. Okay, we've kind of come to the end of a very interesting hour. Zoomers, just to let you know that coming up next Thursday, we have a lady called Mary Colwell who'll be talking about saving the curlew. And the following Monday, the 29th, an artist by the name of Mandy Baker Murray, who paints birds on feathers. Quite extraordinary, actually. So she'll be sort of talking and showing us her art. I want to thank Margaret. Thank you, Margaret, for sparing your time. I know that time is a bit weird for you because your clock sprung forward before ours, so there's a bit of a confusion of time. But thank you so much. You are a massive inspiration to everyone here and beyond, and I'm so honoured to have had you speak with me tonight.
David, I can't tell you how excited the Peely Island and Spring Song people are that you are joining us on May the 8th. They are thrilled, and we thank you in advance for that, and they will be very happy and grateful. And that will also have a much larger and less local audience than it usually has, because it will be online. So we'll be posting it shortly. It'll be called PIBO and Spring Song Online Gala. And David is our honorary birder for that event. We always have an honorary birder and an honorary writer. The honorary writer is Louise Penny, who writes detective novels, and I just heard that he and Hillary Clinton are collaborating on a thriller about Washington. How strange is that?
Yeah.
Oh, we look forward. Somebody knows where the bodies are buried, and somebody knows how to write about those bodies.
Okay, Zoomers, thank you very much for attending. There was a slight problem tonight in terms of people getting in, so I apologise in advance, or not in advance in the past, should I say, because you'll be seeing this in the future. Apologies, there was a problem on Zoom, but I hope you've enjoyed this evening, and I look forward to seeing you again, and don't forget to keep looking up.